and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of To The Point with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha Television. A lot has transpired ever since 18 Indian soldiers were martyred in Uri. And ever since, we've seen the issue of terrorism being raised by the Indian government time and again at several international fora. To talk about everything that's transpired since Uri took place and what the way forward for the Indian government should be, I have with me Senior Congress leader Dr. Shashi Tharoor on the program. Dr. Tharoor, welcome to The Point.
Thank you. Good to be with you again, Frank.
My first question, of course, are you happy with the kind of measures that the government has taken ever since 18 soldiers were martyred in Uri?
Well, I think that what happened in terms of the so-called surgical strike, though the term itself is a bit confusing because normally surgical strikes refer to air action and precision bombing. But anyway, whatever we call them, that particular action, I think, was exactly what the country wanted. Because I think we had reached a point, and I say we, genuinely speaking, for all parties and for the entire cross-section of political opinion in our country, we had reached the point where the frustration and rage at these repeated pinpricks by Pakistan in pursuance of their wretched strategy of bleeding India through a death of the 1,000 cuts, to quote one of their strategists. Those 1,000 cuts were really getting us down because we never had the comparable satisfaction of giving them their own back. And I must say, for most Indians, we seemed to be a sort of helpless giant while this pesky rodent came and snapped at our heels, sort of the unfortunate Tom in the Tom and Jerry cartoons, and no one wants to be in that position. So there was this level of frustration across the nation, and at the same time, every option available to us either seemed not enough, such as the diplomatic options that have been well tried, or too much, such as a major bombing campaign that could escalate into a war and so on, which obviously is not in our interest. I credit the government and the army with having conducted a measured, proportionate retaliation, which sent across a firm message that we will react, but at the same time was very containable and modest. It targeted terrorists who are assembled in these so-called launch pads. A launch pad, again, is an odd word because a launch pad is what you use to shoot off a missile, not to send people, but I assume these are what we'd call assembly points. And we made it clear that our quarrel is not with Pakistan. Of course, we all know it is, but our quarrel is not with Pakistan, it's with terrorism. And therefore, we said in the initial statement that the army is contemplating no additional operations. For all of these, I give tick marks. We did the right thing. We did it in a proportionate way. The statement issued was measured, calibrated, precise, no bragging, no triumphalism. And we signaled that we had done it, we're not going to do any more. Now the ball is in Pakistan's court as to how to react. Their initial reaction, as you know, was to say deny it had ever happened. They even bust journalists.
That brings me to my next question. Were you surprised at the way Pakistan reacted to all of this?
Well, in one sense, yes, because I thought they'd be furious and they would denounce us and so on. And though some furious denunciations did come, perhaps almost reflexively, the line they seemed to take was this had never happened, it's pure Indian propaganda, that it's an operation that's only happened in the media, airwaves, and that as far as Pakistan is concerned, they've taken international journalists to the line of control and said, see, things are absolutely normal. But the line of control is not sort of, one or two places, that it's a very long line of control. And in those hundreds of kilometers, there are clearly places where we did strike, which we felt were the right ones to strike. Now, having said that, there are some saying, why can't we release video evidence and so on? I see no reason personally to compromise our intelligence gathering to show either our soldiers, their faces, their equipment, their methods of operation, all of that. Why should we reveal it by showing the video? What I'm prepared to do is to say, look, why don't we actually reveal the coordinates of the places we struck? Obviously, Pakistan knows what was hit. So we're not revealing anything they don't already know. Whereas if we release the footage, we are revealing things they don't know and the world doesn't know. So I would be not in favor of releasing footage. I would be in favor of releasing coordinates saying at such and such degrees north, such and such degrees east, we struck at such and such time. Of course, it's possible the Pakistanis are busy repairing those places so they can be made to look normal, which is why if we're going to do that, we should do it very quickly.
Indeed. But every time we talk of Pakistan, there's always the Chinese angle that we need to worry about. And let's not forget the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor runs right through Indian occupied or Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and India is claiming that particular region for a long time now. So when we look at Pakistan as a whole, we need to look at China as well, don't we?
Yes, I mean, China is very clearly Pakistan's most influential backer geopolitically, and they have two motives. One is clearly Pakistan as a balance to India, a constant irritant that can, push India back a little bit and not allow it to get too ambitious in terms of, shall we say, aspiring to equal China's stature on the regional or world stage. So in that degree, having an irritant in the shape of Pakistan is useful for China. But secondly also is the undoubted geopolitical interest in the road that runs through Pakistan, starting through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, going down eventually through Baluchistan and reaching the port of Gwadar. Why? Because of two factors. First, oil and other essential supplies from the Gulf countries can now be trucked up by road to Western China, which will be a colossal 75 to 80% saving in transportation costs. Secondly, Chinese goods can be exported through the land route to the Western world or to ports like Dubai and so on much more easily from Gwadar than they can be from any of the ports on China's eastern seaboard, from where they actually have to go through the South China Sea, the Straits of Malacca, around India, across the Arabian Sea, and then into the Gulf. So again, it's a tremendous advantage for both export and import. This is significant for the Chinese. I think the military advantages may or may not follow later. Those of us in the strategic community here who worried about Chinese nuclear submarines, docking at Gwadar and so on, I think are getting the wrong end of the stick. I don't think that at the moment China's ambitions are military. They could become military if the region became disturbed and the waters were troubled, but their principal interest is economic and geopolitical, and there I think this project means a lot to them.
But is China a country that we should worry about? Should we, be worried at some point in time that China may get involved if things escalate between India and Pakistan?
Well, the reasons we have to worry about China are very clear. They are reasons that emanate from China. First of all, the unwillingness of China to settle the long-running frontier dispute. We have been making very many suggestions that we're prepared to overcome our earlier reluctance to accept the so-called Deng Xiaoping formula and settle along the existing lines of control, more or less, or lines of actual control with some minor adjustments. China says that offer is no longer on the table. Secondly, they have publicly laid claim to Arunachal Pradesh, which for us is non-negotiable. It's a state of India with a population that lives there, votes in India, has a stake in this society. We're not going to surrender them or their territory to the Chinese. And then, of course, the third frustration is this use of Pakistan to keep cutting India down to size. Ironically, India had always seen itself very differently. India had seen itself as a potential friend of China's. And Jawaharlal Nehru, when he was Prime Minister, had gone out of his way to not only support China's prominence on the world stage, including by sort of introducing the Chinese to the Afro-Asian movement, as it was then called, in Bandung in 1955, welcoming the Chinese leadership to India, going to China himself, and so on, but also one would argue, acquiescing in the Chinese takeover of Tibet, which India did not necessarily need to, and refusing to play, at that point, the Western game of being a launch pad for resistance to Chinese occupancy of Tibet. So we did everything possible to show the Chinese that our intentions were not hostile. China, since then, not only turned hostile, went to war with us and so on, but has remained a country that seems to be obsessed with whittling India down to size, keeping India off balance, stimulating Pakistan to prove an irritant or a thorn in our flesh, refusing to settle the border, and so on. Now, all I can say is there are still options available to us, and one obvious option is economic, which the present government appears to be inclined to do. Mr. Modi's government lifted a number of UPA-era restrictions on Chinese investment. Our government had previously not permitted Chinese investment in sensitive sectors like power, telecoms, and ports. But Mr. Modi has lifted all those restrictions. And I can see part of the logic must be, apart from the economic logic, that the more China develops an interest and a stake in the Indian market and in the Indian economy, the bigger China's stake in our country, the less likely that they would indulge in military adventurism or even geopolitical opposition to us. And that logic I can't seriously fault, but it hasn't worked so far because the Chinese have not risen to the bait. They have not come in with significant amounts of investment yet. Again, that might change. But so far, the early exchange of visits between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have not translated into any significant investment in India from China.
Indeed, talking about economics, the most favored nation status, as far as Pakistan is concerned, came up. There was a lot of coverage in the media about it. Prime Minister also called for a meeting and, a decision was to be taken. A decision has not yet been taken on that. What's likely to happen on that front, do you think?
Well, frankly, the decision will not make much of a difference to anybody, I'm sorry to say, because I've always been concerned about the fact that the most favored nation status that we offered Pakistan in 1996 remains the world's only example of a one-sided MFN arrangement. MFN is normally a mutual thing. I give you the same terms of trade you give me. So it's mutually most favored nation. Whereas here what's happening is we have extended it, and for 20 years the Pakistanis have not reciprocated. They have also got hung up on things like the Urdu translation of most favored nation being Sabse Pasandida Desh, and they said India is not our Sabse Pasandida Desh. How can we ever agree to that? And this kind of nonsense. So the result, to be very honest, is that there hasn't really been any significant benefit from it. And even despite us giving them MFN and they're not reciprocating, we sell them more goods than they sell us.
Indeed.
So if we cut the MFN, it will actually not affect them very much because very few Pakistani goods are being bought in India anyway. They complain about non-tariff barriers. That's another issue which we could have addressed. But MFN alone will be at best a slap on the wrist or a symbolic gesture. It will not change anything significantly for Pakistan, and it won't change anything for us.
One aspect that we've not touched upon is the aspect of isolation and how Pakistan has been isolated, at least in the neighborhood. We saw that with the SAARC summit happening, but then Pakistan seems to be unfazed by it. Several Pakistani diplomats and others have gone on national television and said, it doesn't really matter. We have America and we have China on our side, so it doesn't really matter if Afghanistan or a Bhutan or a Nepal really goes with India.
Well, I think that both sides, both arguments actually have their merits. Pakistan has been isolated in the sense that it's quite humiliating for them that 4 of the 8 countries in SAARC pulled out on day one, and within the next 3 days the other 4 also pulled out, which left them having a summit with themselves, and not particularly pleasant prospect. So that I think is a clear sign of disapproval of Pakistani approach. But it's also true that despite Pakistan's many transgressions, despite their development and explosion of nuclear devices, despite their cocking a snook at international law on proliferation issues, and Mr. A.Q. Khan running some sort of nuclear bazaar, despite their fomenting of terrorism, despite the incontrovertible evidence of terrorists having come from Pakistan to Mumbai on 26/11, not to mention 20 other smaller incidents traced directly back to Pakistan, not just by Indian intelligence, but by Western sources tracking them. Despite all of this, and despite Pakistani involvement in a majority of the terrorist attacks in the Western world, Pakistani involvement in the sense of people who have lived in Pakistan or been trained in Pakistan or been inspired by Pakistan or be of Pakistani origin, given all of this, one would have expected Pakistan to have suffered much more than they have suffered. Why have they not suffered? Very simply, because Pakistan has an incredible advantage of location. As they say in Hollywood, location, 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 all that matters. With the international community engaged in Afghanistan, worried about Afghanistan, Pakistan is indispensable to get your troops in and out, logistic support, supplies, everything. On the other side, you have Iran and the Persian Gulf. As far as Iran is concerned, there is no question that the West, despite the recent deal, remains profoundly suspicious of Iran, and they see Pakistan as a potential bulwark. And as for the Gulf, it still remains important, less so for America, which is less and less dependent on Middle Eastern oil, but very much for Western Europe and others, it is significant. And Pakistan cannot be cut out of the equation because they're right at the mouth of the Gulf. At the end of the day, what you're going to do, you have to work with Pakistan. And the Pakistanis have their trump card, which is what the French say, après moi le déluge. That is, after me will come the flood. So if you don't support the nasties who are currently running GHQ Rawalpindi, What is going to be worse is bearded nasties who will also have an Islamist agenda and control of nukes and control of a country with nearly 200 million people. What do you want? You suffer instead some people in uniform who will at least occasionally have a scotch with you and tell you that America is great and that they want to send their kids to Western universities. Rather deal with that lot than risk their being replaced by a bunch of characters who will be worse than the Taliban. This gives the Pakistanis a free pass, and they're right. They'll continue enjoying that free pass for the foreseeable future.
And what's the option really as far as India is concerned then? Because as you yourself mentioned, this is a problem.
Well, look, we don't have great options for influence in the course of events in Pakistan, except for one thing. And I know it's not popular in the present climate to say it, in the present climate when we're busy expelling Pakistani actors and singers from Bollywood. My answer actually lies in the long term in unilateral generosity by India on people-to-people contacts and trade.
That's something that Prime Minister Modi has reiterated also in the past, improving the people-to-people contact between India and Pakistan.
Well, except that he's not done anything, sadly, about the trends in the opposite direction, such as the effort to push Pakistanis out of Bollywood. I mean, I would have said that, to be honest, there's no point talking to the civilian government because they're either unable or unwilling to do anything that they commit to us. Since the military really calls the shots in that country. And we can't talk to the military because the military's entire raison d'etre and their right to dominate Pakistan's economy, society and polity, plus being the army which has the largest share of any country's GDP in the world, is the Pakistani army. All that would cease to be relevant if there wasn't hostility on both borders. So we can't gain anything by talking to the army either. What does that leave us with? It seems to me that it only leaves us with one option, and that is expanding sympathy for us and goodwill towards us in civil society. For that, I would be unilaterally generous with visas. People tell me, oh, but terrorists will take advantage of it. I said, did any of the 2611 killers apply for visas? I mean, the fact is that terrorists don't need visas. They have their own means of coming in and attacking us. What we can do is extend visas
it will give them another mode of infiltration into India.
So we have categories. So you basically have drawn up categories of people who are eligible for easy visas and without restrictions. They can be journalists, they can be business people, they can be retired diplomats and serving diplomats. They can be even if you like certain categories of retired military people. You can draw up the right categories. But the whole idea would be to say to large sections of the Pakistani elite, designers, singers, actors, certainly, writers, musicians, that there is a large audience here, a large public here. Frankly, every Pakistani I've ever met who's come to India has gone away with stars in their eyes about our country. They love the place. In many ways, they see all that is familiar to them and all that is yet unfamiliar, because India seems to them to be what they would like their society to become, but it is not yet. So what we need to do, seems to me, is to take advantage of that by opening up the space to these people, and similarly for trade and business. Let them come in, let them enjoy access to our vast market, which is after all 6 times bigger than their market. And let them realize there are huge advantages in dealing with India and trading with India. It could transform them too. The idea is, once again, as with China, you create a larger constituency of people with a stake in good relations. So that if indeed the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the ISI proceed to do nasty things to India, and these processes are interrupted, as they inevitably will have to be if nasty things happen, then these people will say, why are you doing this to us? You're hurting us too. And presumably the resistance to this kind of behavior in Pakistan will keep growing. I know it doesn't sound like much, but to my mind, it's the one thing we haven't tried.
Indeed. All right. Let's hope that we do something on that front too, and there is some kind of forward movement. But ever since Uri happened, Dr. Tharoor, we've seen people within India called for a multi-pronged approach in dealing with Pakistan. One of the things that came onto the table and that was discussed was the abrogation of the Indus Waters Treaty. Now, it's a very complex subject, isn't it? I mean, there were several people who came out and said, India should stop water to Pakistan. Is that the solution? That clearly is not a solution.
That is not the solution, and the reason it's not the solution is also multi-pronged, if you like. First of all, because we don't abrogate treaties. We are a country that has a worldwide reputation for respect for and adherence to international law, which would be jeopardized and which would hurt us because there are lots of other international laws we want other countries to respect when it comes to dealing with us. Secondly, abrogation is a slightly foolish thing to do. So what you're going to do with all these waters, if they don't flow to Pakistan, even diverting them would flood your plains and cities all the way from Srinagar down to Punjab. I mean, it's not something you can do. You have to build bad dams and so on. That takes years. So it's not in any case an immediate feasible action. Third, and equally significant, is that our quarrel is not with the people of Pakistan. Stopping the Indus waters flowing there and creating drought and famine conditions for innocent peasantry. What does that do for us morally, and what kind of country does it make us? How does it help us in any way? Fourth, if we do that, we are giving an absolute blank check to the Chinese to do the same thing to us where we are downstream of them, namely on the Brahmaputra and its tributaries. So in every respect, this is a bad idea. To my mind, we need to say to the Pakistanis, no, on the contrary, we uphold the treaty, but we will use the provisions of the treaty to their fullest. And where the treaty permits us to use something like 20% of the waters that actually are currently flowing to Pakistan for our own purposes, both for storage as well as for irrigation, we should now start doing so. We have not done so. It'll take us a while to build a storage reservoir. It'll take us a while to build the irrigation channels, but let's do so. Kashmir can use the water. Why have we not been taking advantage of this provision? We should be able to do so.
You know, ever since Uri happened, we've seen that the general public and, quite miffed with everything that had happened. They were upset that India was not taking steps and not, really eliminating threats within Pakistan. And then the surgical strikes happened. Do you think, and there was a sense of euphoria across the nation. We saw, people taking to Twitter, and, there were several tweets about it. Do you think that the government redeemed itself by, conducting those surgical strikes?
Well, I think up to a point, yes. I think certainly the government had been under the cosh a little bit, because you may be aware that before that, on social media and WhatsApp and internet and so on, there were lots of clips going around of things that Mr. Modi had said and written when he was in the opposition or when he was campaigning to be Prime Minister, threatening robust action that in fact he failed to conduct. And therefore, he was actually taking a bit of a beating on social media, and the strikes of September 29 definitely redeemed him, the government and the ruling party in that way. Where I think they've gone too far is in trying to exploit it politically. I think it was a mistake of the BJP, for example, to be very honest, to make it into a political thing, to send out memes and Facebook posts and WhatsApp posts lauding Mr. Parrikar, the defense minister, lauding Mr. Modi, saying that they have, as individuals, done something special. The dignified thing to do would have been to congratulate the army for its professionalism and the government for the decision it took to send the army in, but not to try and make political advantage out of this. In fact, the Goa BJP even wanted to honor Mr. Parrikar in some sort of ceremony. He should have had the decency to say no, if for no other reason than the fact that when Pathankot was hit in January, the then Vice Chief of the Army Staff, Lieutenant General Philip Campos, was asked to do a review of the perimeter security arrangements at army installations. He did a thorough report and recommendations as to how to strengthen them. The report has been sitting in the Defense Ministry since March, unattended and unimplemented. And in September, we lost 18 lives. No heads have rolled in the Defense Ministry, but everyone in the Defense Ministry involved with this disgraceful conduct should be hanging their heads in shame, not celebrating themselves and their minister.
Several Congress leaders have come out in the recent past and said that several surgical strikes like this were conducted during the Congress's regime as well, but the Congress did not make a big deal out of it. So was there something, or is there something for the Congress to learn out of what the BJP did after 29th September?
Well, the Congress's calculation, not the Congress, the government's calculations at that time were that if we rub it in and humiliate the Pakistanis, they will feel all the more obliged to retaliate and there will be escalation. So the logic of the government was, we'll do it. Those who need to know have got the message. In other words, the Pakistani army knows they don't behead an Indian soldier without getting some of their people killed. And it goes back up the chain that there was retaliation. Scores are settled. They won't feel the need to oblige. If you start crowing about your retaliation, they will feel obliged to retaliate further. And then you go up the escalatory ladder, which is not good for India, especially in India that is focused on economic development. That was the logic. Clearly, this government has thrown that particular logic out of the window. And in terms of what public opinion wanted, they've done the right thing. But it remains to be seen whether this then continues to get to a point where the other side feels obliged to up the ante. And there I think that the fundamental caution I have repeatedly expressed will come back in, which is we must never lose sight of our overriding strategic objective, which is the development, prosperity and well-being of our own people, which requires security definitely, but also requires peace.
I doubt there will be a further escalation because Sartaj Aziz himself has come out and spoken, and he said that the NSAs of both the countries have spoken to each other and have spoken about reducing the tension along the LOC. So hopefully things are moving in the right direction. Let's hope that that happens. Final thoughts, Dr. Tharoor, before we end the program.
Well, I would welcome the idea of talks. You know, the fact is, when I met with the foreign minister, I conveyed my view that the time had come for us, now that we have had this triumph, to stretch out the olive branch, to stretch out a hand and say that as long as Pakistan is committed to actually taking action against terrorists, then we would be willing to talk to them. The problem at the moment is that Pakistan is not willing to make any such commitment. So talking becomes pointless. We have not been opposed to talks. The only issue is, what do we talk about? What is the message we convey? And that should be a firm one. This week we have conveyed the message of our strikes, of our military action. Tomorrow we should be able to convey the message of peace as well.
Indeed. All right. On that peaceful note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of To The Point. Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor, for being part of the program and putting things into perspective for us.
Thanks, Frank.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.